Before we dive into the story, don't forget to like the video and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. "I can be a good wife, just let me live," she pleaded. And the cowboy took off his hat and said, "Then stay."
The town was smaller than most maps made it seem. Just a few buildings that leaned with time, their boards gray from wind and sun. Dust rolled through the empty main road like low fog, coating everything from the step rails to the shutters. No voices, no greetings. Just heat and silence. A place where people kept their heads down and their doors half shut. She entered from the southern edge of town, limping slightly, the arch of one foot torn from walking over shale and thorns. Clara Boone hadn't eaten in over a day. Her stomach burned, not with hunger anymore, but with the sick ache of collapse. Her hands were shaking, though she didn't try to hide them. There was no one left to hide from. Her dress, once cream-colored, was stained with sweat, earth, and dry blood. The neckline had torn days ago, then torn again. She had tried stitching it back with a sliver of broken thread, but gave up when her fingers wouldn't stop trembling. Her hair, long, dark, and once her mother's pride, hung in uneven strands stuck to her neck and face. A gash above her left brow had closed into a scab, and she had scratches along her arms from cutting through mesquite scrub the day before. She didn't cry. She hadn't for days. The tears had run out sometime between the last man who traded her and the woman in the previous town who slammed a door in her face. She wasn't looking for help anymore. Just air, just space to exist for another day. Maybe one more night under shelter. Maybe not. The townsfolk noticed her. She could feel it in their glances, quick, calculating, and then turn away. One man ducked inside the barber's shop. A woman near the well clutched her child's arm and whispered something urgent before pulling the girl away. Clara's breathing grew short. She wasn't used to this kind of quiet. It wasn't peace. It was judgment, dressed up in heat and doors that didn't open to the far end of the street. Beside the feed store, a man stood still in the shade. Tall, broad-shouldered, left leg bent stiff at the knee. He leaned against the wall like he'd been there a while, a hand resting on his belt, the other at his side. His hat was pulled low. Sunlight caught the edge of a scar across his jaw. Ethan Ward didn't move. He had arrived in Dry Hollow 6 years back, after the war, and after the sickness, took his wife and son in a mountain town north of Abilene. Since then, he kept to his land. For mules. A small herd. He came to town when he had to, once a month for nails, flour, or wire. He never lingered. Folks didn't ask why. They could see it in his face. People said he had been a scout with the cavalry. Good with maps. Better with a rifle. They didn't know much else, and Ethan didn't offer it. What they did know was this. He didn't talk unless there was a reason. And when he looked at you, it was always clear he had measured the distance between you and the exit. Now he watched the woman stumble, that he saw the way her ankle twisted, how she went down on both knees near the post office, her dress pooling in the dirt like she didn't care if it tore again. Her shoulders rose and fell too fast. She pressed one hand flat against her chest, and for a moment it looked like she might faint. He stayed still. Clara didn't cry out. Instead, she looked up and saw him. Their eyes met. She didn't know him. He didn't look kind or gentle. He didn't offer a smile or move toward her. But he wasn't looking away either. Not like the others. That was enough. Her voice broke as she crawled forward a few inches and knelt again. "I could be a good wife," she whispered, barely loud enough to carry. "Just let me live." Ethan didn't blink. He didn't look around to see who was watching. He didn't move for several seconds. Then, slowly, he took off his hat, lowering it with quiet, deliberate motion like someone offering a pause, not a promise. "Then stay," he said. Nothing more. He turned and walked back toward the alley beside the feed store. Claire stayed on her knees. Her legs felt weak and uncoordinated. The words hung in her ears, "Then stay," and she didn't know if it was an order, an offer, or something in between. She blinked through the haze. The sun stung her skin. The man had disappeared behind the building. She forced herself to stand. Each step toward that alley felt like pushing through water. She turned the corner and found him hitching a mule to a buckboard, checking the reins, his movements quiet but practiced. He didn't ask her name. He didn't ask where she came from. He only looked at her once, briefly, to see if she was still standing. Then he climbed onto the wagon bench. Clara climbed into the back without a word as the wagon rolled out of town. No one called after them. The sound of the wheels was sharp against the silence. For a long time, neither spoke. The mule plodded forward, dust lifting behind them. Clara held the side of the wagon with both hands, steadying herself. Her thoughts were scrambled, torn between fear and relief. She didn't know what she'd agreed to. She didn't know where he was taking her. But he hadn't turned her away, hadn't told her to keep moving. That was more than anyone else had done in months. Ethan kept his eyes on the trail. He didn't glance back to it was only near dusk, when the sun had dipped low and shadows stretched across the open land, that he spoke again. Just 3 words. Drink. You need it. He handed the canteen over his shoulder without looking. Clara hesitated, then took it. The water hit her stomach hard, and she choked once, then drank slower. When she handed it back, her fingers grazed his. He didn't react. They reached the ranch after nightfall, at a single cabin. Low roof. One lean-to for the mule. Firewood stacked by the door. A bucket on the porch half full with rainwater from the week before. Inside, the place was sparse. One cot, a workbench, a stove with a small iron pot on top. It smelled like beans and dust and something faintly metallic. Ethan lit a lamp. Bench by the stove, he said, motioning toward the flatwood against the wall. You can sleep there. Clara moved slowly, her legs barely holding. She sat with her back against the wall, arms curled around her sides. Her eyes drifted toward the fire, and her body flinched once when the wood inside cracked. She hadn't been in a room alone with a man in months without fearing pain. Her body didn't trust stillness. Not yet. Ethan sat on the far end of the table. Facing away, he unlaced his boots, cleaned the mud off the soles with a rag, folded it neatly, set it on the shelf. Then he sat back with his hands on his knees, quiet and still. She watched him from the corner of her EY, and no questions. No conditions. No threats, just a roof, a bench, and a man who didn't look at her like she owed him something. That night, she didn't sleep much, but she didn't run either. The next morning came with no sound but the scrape of boots on old wood. Clara stirred from the bench near the stove, her neck stiff from sleeping upright. One arm curled beneath her chin, the other clutched across her ribs like a habit she hadn't yet unlearned. The room was already warm. Someone had stoked the fire before dawn. She blinked hard, taking in the faint gray light through the gaps in the shutters, and smelled beans warming on the stove, strong coffee already brewed. Ethan was at the table, sleeves rolled to the elbow, bandaging his left hand with practiced efficiency. His palm was red and swollen, maybe from the fencing wire she saw coil near the wall. He didn't speak when he noticed her awake. Just finished tying the cloth, poured coffee into a tin mug, and set it down on the table across from him. Not close, not far, just there. Clara sat up slowly. Her whole body ached. Legs sore, ankles swollen. The bones of her hips pressed through the bench during the night. Her eyes moved to the cot, untouched. He hadn't used it. That thought caught her off guard. She looked at him, but he wasn't offering an explanation. "Is this your home?" she asked finally, voice rough. Ethan nodded once. "Built it myself. 8 years ago." She waited, hoping he might add something more. He didn't. She shifted again, trying not to wince. "Why'd you bring me here?" He glanced toward the window. "Didn't seem right to leave you there." She studied him in the silence that followed. He had no ring, no signs of anyone else. A coat hung on a wall, patched and worn. One rifle leaned near the door. A woman hadn't lived here in years, maybe ever. His face gave nothing away. "I can work," she said. "I know. I don't want pity. You're not getting any." His tone wasn't sharp, just steady like the sound of an axe in dirt. Not meant to scare, just end a conversation clean. But he wasn't dismissing her either. He stood, reached for the coffee, refilled her mug. When she didn't move to take it, he set it on the table again and went back to the stove. Beans. Cornbread. Nothing fancy, but hot. That's when the questions began, quiet, inside her chest. What did he expect? Did he want a wife? A servant? Was this temporary? Why had he said stay, but not touched her, not asked her name, not asked what she could offer? She hadn't told him anything. Not about the man who claimed her last, or the traitor before him. Not about the first husband, if you could call him that, who lost her in a game of cards outside Buckhorn. She hadn't said her name, hadn't asked as that she'd slept in barns, wagons, even under a broken saloon stair. But never a cabin, never with someone who didn't make demands. That silence was starting to feel louder than anything else. After breakfast, Ethan stood by the door and motioned to a pair of worn boots on the floor near the wall. They'll fit close enough. Better than bare feet. Clara looked at him confused. They're not mine. Don't have anyone else to wear them. She rose slowly, picked them up. Wanted a split near the toe. She slid them on. They were tight, but usable. She kept her head down. He handed her a folded bundle next. Simple clothes. Canvas skirt. Plain cotton shirt. Not new. Not torn. I'll be in the field, he said. Fences down near the creek. Mules tied out back. She followed him outside, unsure whether she was expected to or not. The morning was bright, dry, the kind of heat that didn't wait until noon. The land behind the cabin stretched far. Mesquite trees, dry grass, a shallow rise in the earth through a line of scrub near the ridge. He pointed to the lean-to. Water's in the barrel. There's a rope if the bucket's dry. He walked toward the fence line, shoulders squared, limp barely noticeable unless you look closely. She stayed back, arms crossed, eyes on him for a long while. He didn't look back. Inside again, she changed into the clothes, cinched the skirt with a piece of twine from the table, and washed her face in the cold water from the barrel. She tied her hair back roughly, stared at her reflection in the pan. Her face looked sunburnt, hollow, but something in her jaw, set tighter now, told her she wasn't broken. By midday, she walked out toward the fence. Ethan didn't seem surprised to see her. He handed her a length of wire and nodded toward the corner post. Wrap it tight. She didn't ask how. She just started working. That IT wasn't easy. The wire bit into her palms. Her arms shook, but he didn't correct her unless she did something that wouldn't hold. Then he stepped in, adjusted the angle, said nothing, and stepped back. They worked in silence. It was better that way. He didn't ask about her past. She didn't ask about his, but she noticed things, the way he reached for the fence with his good hand and braced with the bad one. The old blood on the back of his shirt near the shoulder. The way his eyes scanned the land every few minutes, like he expected something or someone to be watching. And he noticed her too, how she winced when lifting, how she kept her arms close to her body, how she turned her face away when the wind stirred dust. They didn't speak until the sun was low. Name's Ethan, he said, almost like he hadn't meant to say it at all. She looked over. Clara, she replied. Clara Boone. He nodded once. That night, after supper, beans again, bread, no complaints. He brought in 2 extra blankets from a chest and handed them to her without comment. She didn't ask for the cot. He didn't offer. She laid them out across the bench, folded them over once, and made duty sat near the door with a ledger and a pencil stub, checking off supplies. It looked like he hadn't written in it for a while. Before he turned down the lamp, he said only one thing. Next trip to town's in 4 days. If you need anything then, write it down. She stared at the blank scrap of paper he left beside her on the table. She didn't know yet what she needed. But for the first time in a long time, she had a place to think about it, and she wasn't running anymore. The third morning came with wind, not hard, but steady enough to rattle the tin pail outside and push dust up around the corners of the cabin. The shutters clicked faintly against the frame. Clara woke before light fully broke, blankets pulled up to her chin, her back stiff from another night on the bench. She didn't stir right away. She listened to no voices, no boots, just the sound of Ethan moving through his routine. The kettle already whistled low on the stove. Wood creaked under his steps. She caught the scent of salt pork warming in a skillet. Just a scrap, but enough to cut the taste of beans he hadn't said much the day before. But he'd let her work beside him. He hadn't stopped her, hadn't watched her too closely. Just let her struggle, adjust, figure things out. That meant something. So this morning, when she sat up and folded her blankets, she didn't wait for permission. She stepped into the corner where she'd left her clothes to dry overnight, dressed, and tied her hair back with a fraying strip of cloth. When she turned, Ethan was setting a tin plate on the table. He didn't look surprised to see her up. You're early, he said. I didn't sleep much. He gave a small nod, like that was expected. They sat across from each other, eating in silence again, but it wasn't awkward. Not like that first morning. It was the kind of silence that comes from two people too tired for small talk and too guarded for anything else. After they finished, she stood and cleared both plates without asking. She rinsed them at the basin with water from the barrel, set them to dry on the sideboard, then looked back at him. What else needs doing? Ethan rubbed at his jaw with his thumb, thinking. Chickens need feeding. Coop's behind the lean-to. She stepped outside without another word, the wind tugging at her skirt, dust already clinging to the hem. She found the coop, small but solid, and scattered feed from the sack tied up under the overhang. The hens clucked and pecked and strutted around her boots like she'd done this 100 times. She hadn't, but no one would have guessed. When she came back around the corner, Ethan was at the chopping block with an axe, splitting juniper. She crossed her arms and watched for a while, noticing how he favored his right leg more than the left, how he shifted his weight to keep balance. The scar across his jaw caught the light again. It looked newer today, though she couldn't explain why. Maybe because this was the first time she was really studying him. He looked up after a minute. You can split kindling? Not well. You'll learn. He set a smaller axe down beside the block and stepped aside. She didn't hesitate. Her hand still stung from the fencing wire, but she lifted the tool and got to work. He didn't correct her, didn't hover, just returned to his pile and worked in rhythm beside her. Later, when the sun climbed higher, they took water under the overhang. He offered her a clean rag to wipe her neck and left a biscuit beside her tin cup. It wasn't kindness in the way most folks would name it. It was more like fairness. Recognition. She was working, so she earned her place. She finally asked the question that had been sitting in the back of her throat for days. Why don't you ask what I've done? Ethan didn't answer right away. He chewed a piece of biscuit, then drank. When he set the cup down, his eyes didn't meet hers. Because I don't care. That stunned her more than it should have. She blinked, but he kept going. Only question I ever ask is whether someone keeps their word. You said you'd stay. You work. That's all I need. She nodded once, but something twisted in her chest. It wasn't shame. Not anymore. She had carried shame like a sack of stones for too long. Through towns, over hills, across nights she didn't remember. This was something else. Something lighter. Like breathing after holding your breath too long. That evening, while she cleaned out the stove and wiped the table, she noticed the cot had been remade. The blanket folded clean. The pillow fluffed. She didn't know when he'd done it, but it hadn't been like that in the morning. A folded shirt lay on top, a patched one, probably his. She didn't ask if it was for her, and he didn't say. But that night, after she banked the fire and blew out the lamp, she walked to the cot instead of the bench. She laid down slowly, testing the springs, the fabric, the creak of the frame. It didn't smell like him. It smelled like soap and dust and old wool. Still, she felt something shift inside her chest as she stared at the ceiling, listening to the wind move through the cracks outside. In the dark, his voice came, low and steady. There's a storm line heading north. Might hit by tomorrow. Do you need to cover anything outside? It's done. She didn't say anything else. Neither did he. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was something shared, something settled. She pulled the blanket up to her shoulders, and this time, she slept. The storm rolled in slow and mean the next afternoon, the sky turning a dull silver by mid-morning, with a wind that rattled fence posts and bent the mesquite low. Ethan had been right. He didn't say much about it, just secure the roof tarp, check the shed doors, and move the mule undercover before the first line of rain even hit. Clara helped without being asked uppy why now. She understood where things were and what needed doing. She didn't need direction to tie off the feed sacks or bring in the kindling pile. Her hands were blistered from days of labor, her back sore from unfamiliar effort, but she welcomed it. Working meant she belonged to the rhythm of this place. Even if she still didn't fully understand what it meant to be here, by the time the first drops fell, she and Ethan were back inside the cabin, boots heavy with mud, shirts damp across the shoulders. He moved without speaking, striking a match and lighting the lamp before daylight could fade too much. Outside, the rain tapped harder against the shingles, steady, not yet violent, but promising to stay. Clara hung her coat near the stove. She turned to see him brushing mud from his pant leg. The the scar on his jaw tight from the cold. She broke the quiet. "You always live this far out." He nodded, folding a towel and placing it on the bench. "Closest neighbor's a mile west. Fella who doesn't say much more than I do." "Do you like that?" she asked. "The distance." Ethan looked up from where he knelt by the stove, feeding a small split log into the firebox. "I don't like much anymore," he said, "but I get by." She studied him a moment. His words weren't cruel, just honest. Not the kind of things said for sympathy. More like a man who'd grown used to carrying weight and didn't see much sense in pretending it wasn't there. They sat at the table as the storm deepened, each with a tin cup in hand, steam rising between them. For the first time, Clara didn't feel she had to guard her posture or watch his eyes. She let her shoulders rest. She spoke low, but without apology. "I was sold 3 times," she said. "First by my husband, then by the man who won me in a dice game. Then again in Red Rock for supplies and a pack of mules." Ethan didn't look away, didn't blink. He just listened. "They didn't ask me my name," she continued. "They just traded like I was part of the deal, like a broken wagon or a sick goat. The last one hit me when I wouldn't," she stopped. Not because she didn't have the words, but because this wasn't a confession and she didn't know the whole story. The air between them was quiet again. Not awkward, just real. Like they both understood some things didn't need finishing to be heard. Ethan leaned back in his chair, arms crossed loosely, and spoke in a voice just above the sound of rain. "I buried a wife and a son. Fever took them in '77. They were gone before I got home." She looked at him, blinking that he added, "I was out scouting for a rail crew. Thought I had 2 weeks left. Got back and found graves under the cottonwood." The air thickened again, not with grief, but something quieter. The shared recognition that each of them had already lost everything worth clinging to. The fire cracked behind them. "I thought about putting a bullet in my own mouth," Clara said plainly. Ethan didn't flinch. "Didn't, though," she added. "Guess I still wanted something, even if I didn't know what." "You still want something now?" he asked. She shrugged, her voice low. "Not to die. Not yet." That was as much truth as either had spoken in a long time. It hung there, honest and solid, like the rain on the roof or the coffee between them. Later, when the storm turned from steady to hard, they worked together in practiced silence, placing towels along the sill where water leaked, checking the coop through the side window, moving buckets onto the drip line. Ethan tied the door shut with a length of twine, while Clara boiled beans and laid out 2 cups, and no one asked for anything. No one explained. That night, the wind howled hard enough to shake the shutters. Ethan tossed an extra blanket on the cot without comment. Then, as he turned to check the stove one last time, Clara stood from where she'd been drying her hair and crossed the floor with a steady step. She stopped beside him. Not close enough to touch, but close enough to feel the warmth of him. "Thank you," she said, "for letting me stay." His jaw moved slightly as he met her eyes. "I said you could," he answered. "I don't go back on what I say." For a brief second, her hand hovered near his, then dropped. The air between them didn't change, but it felt like something small had shifted. Not romantic, not yet, but necessary. Human. He stepped back, gave a slow nod, and turned toward the door. "Storm should break by morning," he said. "We'll check the fence line then." Clara climbed into the cot and pulled the blanket up, listening to his boots cross the floor, the latch click as he checked the door one last time. And for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel like something might be taken from her while she slept. She simply closed her eyes and rested. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving behind a land soaked in quiet. Mud clung to every surface. The sky was pale and overcast, and a cold breeze pushed through the brush, carrying the smell of wet dirt and cedar. Ethan was already up, his coat on, boots thick with mud, working on a broken fence post near the corral when Clara stepped out. She had tied her hair back, sleeves rolled, her skirt hitched slightly to avoid the worst of the puddles. She didn't wait for him to call. She grabbed the wire spool from the porch, stepped carefully through the soft ground, and joined him at the post. Her boots sank into the mud. Her hands, though scraped and raw, moved without hesitation. "I figured you'd be out here," she said. "You figured right." She took one end of the wire and wrapped it tight, then braced the post as he hammered the brace nail down. The work didn't need words, but the silence between them now wasn't the same as before. It wasn't survival. It was rhythm. After a while, Clara asked, "You ever think about leaving this place?" Ethan didn't look up. He set the hammer down slowly, then straightened. "I tried," he said. 2 years ago. Packed a mule, took off towards San Angelo. Thought I'd start over somewhere nobody knew me. What happened?" He took a breath. 3 days in, I realized I didn't care about any place new. Didn't want to explain myself. Didn't want to start again. So I came back. Clara nodded slowly. She understood that. Not everyone ran because they wanted a new life. Some just didn't want to fight anymore. Some were just looking for a place quiet enough to stop bleeding. After the fence was secured, they walked the perimeter of the property. Clara noticed things now. The low spots where the water collected, the lean in the south fence line, the mule's gait when it walked uneven ground. She asked questions. He answered. No lectures, no judgment. Just facts. 18 midday, they returned to the cabin. She cleaned up, reheated the stew, and laid out cornbread. He poured coffee, added a bit of salt to the beans. They sat and ate, shoulders loose from labor, hands still stained from earth and wire. She finally asked a question that had hovered in the air for days. What did people say when I left town with you? Ethan chewed, swallowed, and looked toward the window. Some called you trouble. Some said I'd gone soft. Some figured I'd brought a woman in for the winter. Her eyes lowered. And what did you say? I didn't. She nodded, jaw tight. They think I'm yours? They think whatever fills the space, he said. I don't waste time correcting folks. She didn't know whether to feel protected or exposed. Maybe both. The idea of being thought of as someone's property again sat heavy in her chest, even if no one had said it to her face. I'm not yours, she said. I know, he replied. But I'm not nothing either. He looked at her then. Direct, calm. You're not. They didn't speak after that for a while, but something had been cleared, named. Not to change anything, but to mark it plain. Ethan had taken her in, but he hadn't claimed her. Not in the way men had before. And that difference mattered. That afternoon, Clara cleaned the coop, patched a torn feed sack, and stitched a loose sleeve on one of Ethan's older shirts. She noticed it was the same one she'd seen folded on the cot the day she first moved from the bench. He had meant it for her. Quietly, but clearly by dusk, she'd lit the lamp and was folding linens when a knock came at the door. Ethan stepped forward quickly, one hand brushing the rifle near the doorway out of habit. Clara moved behind him, cautious but not panicked. They hadn't had visitors. Not once since she arrived. Ethan opened the door. 2 men stood outside. Mud-caked boots, wide-brimmed hats, and the kind of eyes that scan a room before speaking. One had a badge pinned to his coat. Ward, the taller one said. Heard you brought a woman back from Dry Hollow. Ethan didn't answer right away. His body didn't move. But Clara saw the shift in his jaw, the slight reposition of his stance. She here? The second man asked, eyes flicking toward the lantern light. She is, Ethan said. She's not your concern. The badge holder stepped forward half a pace. Fella came through town a few days back, saying a woman ran off with property that wasn't hers. Claimed she was his wife. Had a mark on her left shoulder, scar shaped like a crescent. Clara's breath caught. Her left hand rose instinctively to her collarbone, covering the old scar. It was there, from a belt buckle. Years old, but unmistakable. I didn't steal anything, she said, stepping into view. He beat me near to death. Sold me. Twice. You want to talk about crimes? Go find him. The man with the badge looked her over. You have any proof of that? Clara's voice was steady, though her hands trembled. Would I be here if I did? The 2 men exchanged a look. Ethan said nothing, but the weight of his presence filled the doorway like a closing gate. The badge holder finally stepped back. We ain't looking to stir trouble. Just following up. If he comes out this way, you might want to be ready. I always am, Ethan said. They tipped their hats and left without further word. Ethan shut the door and turned the bolt. Clara hadn't moved. She stood near the stove, chest rising fast. He didn't speak. Just walked to the wall, took down the rifle, checked the chamber, then set it by the door. We'll keep watch tomorrow, he said. She sat down at the table, pressing both hands to the wood. I didn't expect that. You should. he replied. People like him don't stay gone. She looked at him, eyes hard. Would you send me away if they came back? Ethan met her stare. I said stay. That was all. She nodded slowly. The fear didn't vanish, but shifted. She wasn't hiding anymore. She was standing still, and someone was standing with her. The next morning, neither of them spoke much. Ethan stood by the fence line with his rifle slung across his back, eyes scanning the ridge beyond the eastern pasture. Clara watched him from the cabin porch while wringing out the washcloths into a bucket, her hands red from cold water, her eyes flicking toward him more than she meant. He hadn't said anything different when they woke, hadn't acted nervous. But the rifle hadn't left his side since the deputies left, and that alone said enough. Inside the cabin, the air felt changed, tense, but not in a panicked way. Clara moved about quietly, cleaning, prepping the stew pot, setting extra logs by the stove. The difference was in how they held themselves, alert but controlled, like people who'd lived through enough not to waste energy until it was needed. By mid-morning, Ethan returned to the porch and stood beside her. His coat was unbuttoned. His jaw hadn't been shaved in days. He looked out over the land as if measuring every trail in and out. You think he'll come? Clara asked without looking at him. Maybe, he said. Men like that don't like losing what they think they own. She tensed. He doesn't own me. I know. She nodded, jaw tight. Why don't you go to the sheriff? She asked after a moment. Tell him what he's done. Ethan looked down at the dirt. I've seen law help the strong more than the right, he said. They heard you. They still asked for proof. He wasn't wrong. Clara had seen the same. All her life, law had favored whoever had the deed, the badge, or the bigger mouth. Still, something about it burned. I don't want to keep running, she said. You're not running now, Ethan answered. You stood there, told her what happened. That was more spine than most folks have. Clara turned to face him, hands at her sides. Then what happens if he comes? What happens if he brings men? Ethan looked at her plainly. Then he sees what standing looks like. That quiet confidence steadied her in a way nothing else could have. He wasn't making promises he couldn't keep, but he wasn't moving aside either. And for the first time since she'd been traded off that wagon in Red Rock, she felt the ground hold steady under her feet. Later that day, Ethan showed her where the rifle shells were kept, not in some hidden drawer, but in a small wooden box under the cot, beside a folded cavalry coat and a yellowed map of the hill country north of the property. You ever fired one? He asked. Clara hesitated. Not at anything that could shoot back. That might be enough. She held the rifle, checked the chamber. It was heavier than she remembered, but it steadied in her hands like she'd held it once before in another life. They took it out behind the coop, where a fence post stood leaning from last season's storm. He lined up 3 tin cans on top and stepped back. You don't have to hit him, he said. Just feel the weight. The way it kicks. She fired once. Missed by inches. The sound rang across the field and echoed back from the ridge. Her shoulder jarred, but she didn't drop it. Ethan nodded. Again, the second shot clipped a can and sent it tumbling. The third knocked one clean off the post. The fourth shot. Her hands were steadied as he watched her, arms crossed, his face unreadable. But something in his posture shifted. Like respect, like trust. That night, after the stew was finished and the dishes cleaned, Ethan sat at the table longer than usual. Clara folded laundry nearby, her back to him, listening for his voice. Was it him who gave you the scar? He asked quietly. She turned. His eyes were on the cup in his hand. Not her. Yes, she said. He hit me with his belt because I spoke to a boy at the well. Thought I was going to leave him. Ethan didn't move. He said I was lucky he kept me. She added. Said women like me end up in ditches if they don't stay where they're put. He set the cup down. You're not where he put you now. No, she said. I'm not. The fire behind her cracked once, and the wind shifted outside. Clara crossed the room and sat across from him at the table, folding her hands in her lap. You don't talk about her, she said. My wife? She nodded. Ethan looked toward the window, as if he could see through it into some other year. She died fast. Fever. Nothing I could have done. My boy went next day. I was 2 days from home. He said it plainly, with no trembling in his voice, no apology for the bluntness of it. Just truth. Just the weight of it laid bare on the table like an old tool. I don't talk about it, he added, because there's nothing left to fix. Grief doesn't get smaller. You just get used to walking with it. Clara's throat tightened. She didn't reach for him, didn't speak. She simply looked at him as a man who'd lost more than most and had still found room for her on his land. And in his silence, the fire burned lower. When she rose to bank it, her hand brushed his sleeve. He didn't pull away. She paused. That was the moment it shifted. Not just routine, not just survival, but something human beneath it. Something permanent. She didn't move closer. He didn't reach for her. But for the first time, the silence between them didn't just carry weight. It carried warmth. And that, for now, was enough. The next days passed without incident, but not without weight. The tension didn't vanish. It settled low, like a coiled rope near the door. Clara and Ethan moved through their routines like they had for weeks now, but the rhythm felt different, more deliberate. Each chore felt like preparation. Each glance out toward the road came with quiet expectation. Clara woke earlier now. She had taken to boiling water before Ethan was out of bed, folding the blankets, brushing out the ashes in the stove, and setting 2 mugs on the table without comment. He didn't stop her. He just adjusted to her presence as if she had always been there. Like she belonged. It was on the 3rd morning after the deputy's visit that Clara found the letter. She had been dusting near the mantel when she noticed it. Folded paper, tucked neatly beneath the edge of the ledger book. It wasn't hidden, just set aside. She glanced toward the barn where Ethan was hauling feed, then opened it slowly, careful not to tear it. It wasn't long. Written in firm, careful script. It had no date, no address. If you're reading this, it means I didn't come back. There's a deed under the bed frame, signed and legal. You'll find the rifle rounds where I always kept them. The cabin is yours. So is the land. You don't owe anyone a story. Just keep it quiet, keep it clean, and live like someone who stayed. Clara read it twice. She didn't cry. Instead, she folded it back along the original creases, slid it under the ledger where it had been, and stared at the mantel for a long time. When Ethan came in, wiping sweat from his brow, she was already ladling beans into the pot. You wrote a goodbye, she said without turning. He stood by the door, motionless for a beat. Wasn't meant for now, he said. Wrote it before I brought you back from town. She turned to face him. Why keep it? In case someone came looking for me again. Her voice dropped. And you plan to just leave everything? Ethan shook his head. Plan to die defending it, more like. Letter was for the afterward. Clara stepped forward, slow. You thought you'd have to fight for me. I figured if you stayed, someone might come and take you. And I figured if I stood in the way, I might not walk back inside. Clara looked at him then, really looked. Not just at the scar on his jaw or the stiffness in his gait, but at the man who had built this place alone and still made space for someone else's ruin without asking for thanks. She spoke quietly. If I left tomorrow, would you stop me? Ethan's eyes met hers. No, even if you knew, I'd have nowhere to go. He didn't answer immediately. He stepped past her, set down the feed sack on the bench, then turned again. I don't want to keep anything that doesn't want to be here, he said. But I'd miss you if you went. It was the most honest thing he'd said to her since that first day. Clara crossed her arms, not defensive, just holding herself steady. I'm not running anymore, she said. I just needed to know I could choose. You can, Ethan said. The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was steady. It was clear. The air between them had shifted again, not from survival this time, but from choice. That evening, she walked to the well alone, bucket in hand, rifle slung over one shoulder. A man across the ridge might have called it dangerous, letting a woman go out near dusk. But Clara knew these paths now, knew the way the shadows fell across the rocks, knew which branches snapped easy and which ones bent. She filled the bucket and turned back toward the cabin, boots soft in the dirt, eyes watching the tree line that a rabbit darted near the cedar brush. Nothing more. Back inside, Ethan had cleared the table. 2 plates, a bit of jerky. She set the bucket near the stove and looked at him plainly. Do you want me to stay? She asked. He didn't look up from the knife he was sharpening. I already told you you could. That's not what I asked. He set the blade down, leaned back in his chair, and looked at her without hesitation. Yes, he said. She nodded once, then walked over, slow. She set her hand on the table, fingers just brushing his. He didn't pull away. His hand shifted, turning just enough so his callous thumb pressed into the inside of her palm. Words passed. But something else did. It wasn't firelight or swelling music. It was smaller than that. Simpler. A choice made without show. Clara leaned in and kissed him. Just once. Just enough to feel him breathe. Just enough to say what hadn't yet been said. When she stepped back, his eyes didn't close. He didn't move. But the corners of his mouth tightened in a way that wasn't quite a smile, but close. She spoke last, her voice steady. I'm here now, and I want to stay. And Ethan, without saying more, reached out and touched the side of her waist. Gentle, sure, real. And for both of them, that was the beginning of something new. Not survival, not debt, but home. The morning after their first kiss came without ceremony. No lingering touches, no whispered promises. Just the sun rising pale over the ridge and the smell of coffee on the stove. Clara woke before Ethan, folded the blanket over the cot, and moved about the room with quiet purpose. Her body was sore from yesterday's work, but her mind was sharper than ever. Nothing had changed between them outwardly. He hadn't touched her again, hadn't called her anything different, but something had settled. A line crossed, a wall taken down. She knew now he wouldn't hurt her. That was the first truth. But the deeper one, the one she hadn't let herself believe until last night, was that he cared if she stayed. Outside, the chickens stirred, the wind brushed dry leaves against the fence, and the land seemed to have taken a breath. Ethan joined her at the table with his usual slow movements, poured coffee, and sat without speaking. You sleep? Clara asked, eyes on her cup. A bit, he said. You? Enough. They didn't need more than that. After breakfast, they worked side by side in the garden plot, turning the soil, clearing winter weeds that had already begun curling back from a damp. Clara rolled up her sleeves and sank her hands into the dirt without hesitation. Ethan handed her a rusted trowel, then moved to split firewood near the edge of the cabin. They worked quietly, occasionally trading glances, and the silence between them now held something new. Not fear, not tension, but understanding. Around midday, Clara stood and wiped her forehead with her sleeve. Was your wife like me? She asked suddenly. Ethan looked up from the woodpile. No, he said plainly. She was soft. Grew up with land, good family. She'd never split with a day in her life. Clara nodded, unsure what to feel. But she was kind, he added, and brave in her own way. You miss her? Every day. She swallowed. Then why me? Ethan didn't answer right away. He set down the hatchet, walked over, and leaned against the fence. Because you don't ask to be saved, he said. You just keep going. You don't pretend nothing happened. You carry it. Clara nodded slowly. I'm not trying to replace her. I know. Their eyes met. Long enough to settle what hadn't yet been said. This wasn't about filling gaps. It was about building something new with what was left. That evening, while she was peeling potatoes, Ethan reached into the drawer and pulled out a small bundle wrapped in cloth. He unwrapped it carefully and placed it on the table. Inside was a silver brooch, simple but elegant, shaped like a pressed wildflower. A pin missing from the back. Clara stared at it, stunned. Was hers? She asked. Ethan nodded. She wore it to town once, he said. Never liked fancy things. Said it reminded her not to forget beauty, even in dust. Clara touched it gently. I don't want to wear her memory. You wouldn't be, he said. You'd be carrying it forward. She sat quietly for a long moment, then slid the brooch into her palm and closed her fingers around it. Then I will, she said. Later, after supper, Ethan surprised her again. He handed her a clean shirt of his, folded, worn soft at the seams. I think it'd fit you better than mine, she said, smiling faintly. Maybe, he replied. But it looks right on you. She wore it that night. Loose at the shoulders, sleeves rolled, hem hanging past her hips. It wasn't seductive. It was something quieter, something claimed in gesture, not demand. She stood by the fire, brushing out her hair. Ethan watched her for a while from the table, the lamp casting a soft amber light over the room. Then, slowly, he stood, walked over, and took the brush from her hand. You missed a knot, he said, She stilled as he gently worked through the tangle, each stroke quiet, deliberate. His fingers grazed the back of her neck, and her eyes closed for just a moment. "You ever want children?" she asked softly. He paused, then resumed brushing. "I did. I still might." She turned to face him. "I think I could," she said. Ethan didn't smile, but his eyes warmed. "Not yet," she added. "But one day, that'd be all right," he said. She kissed him again, longer this time. His hand came at her waist, slow and careful. He didn't rush, didn't pull, just stayed with her. When they broke apart, she rested her forehead against his chest. "I'm not broken," she whispered. "But I'm not new either." "You're real," he said. "That's all I want." That night, they lay together in the cot. Not rushed, not undone. Just close, just breathing the same air. His arm around her hand at his chest. Nothing spoken after that. Nothing needed. And for the first time in either of their lives, staying didn't feel like surrendered. It felt like home. By spring, the ridge turned green again, just barely. Pale blades of grass pushed up through last year's dust, and the creek behind the cabin flowed a little stronger each morning. The land hadn't changed much, not in any way a stranger would notice, but Clara saw it. Saw how the air held less bite, how the mule moved easier, how even Ethan's steps fell softer when the wind blew from the West Point. 3 months had passed since she first stumbled into town barefoot and near broken. 3 months since Ethan had told her to stay. Now, she didn't need to ask if she still could. She didn't wait for permission. This was her home too, and not because she'd been offered it, but because she'd helped build it back up day by day. That morning, Clara came in from the coop with 3 warm eggs in her hands and a smear of dirt on her cheek. She set them gently in the bowl near the stove and turned to find Ethan at the table, ledger open, pencil in hand. "You're writing again," she said. He nodded. "Try to make sense of what we've got for the next few months. Figure we ought to plant more beans this season. Maybe corn." She poured 2 cups of coffee and joined him at the table. "Want me to help?" Ethan didn't look up right away, just made a mark in the margin. "You already do," he said. They ate breakfast with the window cracked open, the sound of wind in the cottonwood coming in slow and easy. The air smelled like thawed earth. Clara glanced toward the door and then back to him. "They never came," she said. "The men. The one who claimed me." "No," Ethan said. "Guess word got around. You think he gave up?" "I think he knew better." Clara nodded, tracing the rim of her cup with one fingertip. "What if someone else comes next time?" "Then we do what we did this time," he said. "We stay ready. We stand together." She didn't speak for a while. Then she looked up. "I want your name." Ethan looked at her, his expression still, but not surprised. "You sure?" "I don't want it for protection," she said. "I want it because this is my place now. I want the land to know it. I want a town to know it. And I want you to know it." He didn't answer with words. Instead, he stood, walked to the chest near the cot, and pulled out the small inkwell and paper he kept for supply orders. He sat down again, dipped the pen, and slid the paper in front of her. She leaned over the table slowly, wrote her name in clean script, Clara Ward. Below it, he signed his .it wasn't a marriage certificate. There was no preacher, no town hall, no witnesses. But it meant more. It was 2 people saying, "This is what we are, and this is where we stay." Later that day, Ethan dug out an old saw and began trimming boards behind the cabin. Clara watched from the porch, arms crossed, a faint smile on her face. She stepped down and walked to where he knelt, fitting the first plank into the side frame of a small square post. "What's this?" she asked. "A cradle." She blinked. "We're not." "I know," he said. "Not yet. Maybe not for a while. But it's good to be ready." She crouched beside him, one hand brushing the edge of the raw wood. "I didn't think you were the type to plan ahead," she said. "I wasn't," he said. "Until you." She smiled. Tired, full, real. They worked on the cradle together, sanding edges smooth, tightening joints. Ethan didn't say much, but Clara saw the difference in his eyes now. He wasn't just keeping her alive. He was building forward with her. Not out of guilt, not out of need, but out of choice. When night came, the air was warm enough to leave the door open. Crickets sang low in the brush. Inside, the cabin glowed from the single lantern, the cradle resting near the hearth, unfinished but already meaningful. Clara folded a spare blanket, laid it inside the frame, and stepped back. "We can fill it with flour sacks for now," she said. "Make sure it holds weight." Ethan stepped behind her, set a hand gently on the small of her back. "I'd rather fill it with the future," he said quietly. She turned, rested her forehead against his. "You already did." That night, they lay together in the cot. The window cracked, wind passing through like it had no more reason to test them. No more questions left unanswered. Clara didn't wonder anymore if she was safe. Ethan didn't wait for her to leave. They had stayed. And that was the story. Not of rescue, not of escape, but of two people who carried everything that tried to ruin them and still chose to build something new with it, together.